Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 105. A big thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis from now all over the world to hear about our guests, to hear what he or she has to say, and to hear their particular story or the particular issue that they want to talk about. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit that all-important subscribe button so you're kept updated about future podcasts and productions from the Hare Krishna Project. And also, if you're watching this on Facebook, please like or follow, if you haven't already, the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page so you're kept updated about future podcasts and video updates from us as well. Okay, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our 105th guest. It's Danesvara Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Narada. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for getting in touch. We've been communicating with each other for a couple of weeks now about this podcast. I'm very excited about a lot of the issues we're going to talk about today. So let's get going. Let's start with a nice, easy question. Please tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Narada, I'm from all over the place, actually. You can see wearing saffron, and I'm somewhat of a Parivrajacharya. That means I don't really have any fixed residence since about 2005. And at that time, I started traveling all over Europe, Russia, India, that side of the globe. Not so much in America. A little bit I've traveled here, but like that. Where am I from? Yeah, that's where I'm from, everywhere. As I put it, born in Michigan, born again in Gainesville, Florida, which is where I'm doing the movie.
I love that. So that's where you met the devotees. Was it that Discovered Krishna Consciousness?
Yeah, right. That was back in 1972, actually.
Wow.
The first devotee I met was Srila Prabhupada in his books, of course. And that's how I know Prabhupada, the way most of us know Prabhupada, by reading his books. And interesting, the book came to me. It was, around that time I was a young man. And like many young people, you're trying to figure out the world. How does the world work? What is this place? And particularly I was curious about spiritual topics. I was raised as a Catholic and had rejected that as a young man because I could not accept the dogma of the church. So looking around in my early 20s, I'd look at this group and that group, and wherever I went, any of those groups, I'd ask questions, and it always came to the point where they could not answer my questions. So a friend of mine happened to basically was forced to accept the Christian book by devotee doing traveling book distribution. And it's an interesting story. She was, he's trying to distribute the book to her, and she's saying, I'm not interested in religion. And he said, no, take this book. No, I'm not interested in that. No, you must have this book. And she says, well, those are very nice books, but look, I only have $1. She held up her dollar. And so the devotee said, thank you very much. Here. And so he basically forced her to accept the books. She gave them to me. She said, you're into this spiritual stuff. I'm not here. This is for you. So, yeah, Prabhupada came to save me from this wretched material world. So I read Krishna book first. That convinced me that, yes, there is a God, and his name is Krishna. And Prabhupada, he wrote with such authority. It made everybody else seem like they were children, just playing in a sandbox, playing spiritual, whatever that meant, like a child pretends to play house or something. And, but Prabhupada, he was so forceful and confident and sure. And of course, that was very convincing for me. So then in the health food store in town, Prabhupada's books were for sale there, and I saw Bhagavad Gita, and I picked that one up, and I read that, and so I was just finishing it as I was completing my master's degree at University of Florida, and I was so taken by Bhagavad Gita, I dedicated my master's thesis to Lord Sri Krishna, the knower of all and object of all knowledge, much to my mother's chagrin.
Wow.
Yeah, so then the devotees, I graduated in June that year, 73. Then Amarendra Prabhu came and opened the temple up, and I came to know about it very soon after that. And immediately, I walked in the first day, and I kept going back every day. I had a job, I had an engineering degree. So I had a job, and I wanted to quit and become a full-time devotee. But because I was giving half of my paycheck to support the temple, the temple president said, no, this is your devotional service. You continue working. So I had to drag myself out of Bhagavatam class every morning to go to work. And so finally I figured, well, I want to be a devotee. So I'm not going to take my tilak off when I go to work. I'm just going to keep wearing it. And that was quite an interesting experience when I would go into the office and, people, they didn't say anything, but, it's, like a big flashing sign on your forehead. And, as soon as you leave the room, they're going, psst, psst.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was thinking, well, maybe they'll think I'm weird and they'll lay me off or something. But anyway, finally, after about another 6 months or so, they closed that plant where I was working, so I was able to become a full-time devotee. So that's how I came to Krishna.
So you were doing a master's degree in engineering,
Correct.
but you wrote your dissertation, your thesis, about Lord Chaitanya and Bhakti Yoga.
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, I dedicated it to Lord Sri Krishna, the knower of all and object of all knowledge.
Okay, I got it. I thought, well, that was a radical kind of shift or change from engineering, kind of Chaitanya Vaishnavism. But yeah, it's great that you dedicated it to Lord Krishna, to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Fantastic. And you met Prabhupada physically in the 70s.
Well, every time Prabhupada would come to the east coast of the States, we'd go to see him. And so I saw Prabhupada in many different temples up and down the east coast. The only time I sat with him personally is when I received Gayatri Mantra in 1975 in Atlanta. And so, I was a Grahasta from the time I joined. And, Grahastas, they were not very high on the in rank at that time. So, no, I never got to have much personal association. I didn't have any personal association with Srila Prabhupada. But like I said, I know him from his books, and the way most devotees know him. And when speaking at Prabhupada's appearance day or disappearance day, I always bring that up. That we can all know Srila Prabhupada. It's not that he's absent or that. And of course, in those days, even that came along in 73, there was thousands of devotees at that time. So it was only the temple presidents at GBC who were able to have close personal association with Srila Prabhupada.
Wow, that's amazing. So 1972 and then 1973 you joined the temple. It's a long time ago. I mean, in the grand scheme of eternity, it's not long, but that's quite remarkable. So you've been around the Krishna consciousness movement for all of those years.
Yeah.
And that's quite amazing. Okay, let's now change the topic a bit or move on to the next thing we're going to talk about. Is in 2019, you yourself wrote a book. You wrote a book, or a book was published called Divine or Demoniac, Spiritual Movements and the Enemies Within. Please tell us a bit about the book and what encouraged you to write it.
Why don't you show the cover? If you have
Absolutely.
Where you can. put
Yeah.
that on your screen so everybody can have a glimpse of it.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look. So here we go. This is. Can you see that?
Uh, I only see half the page. Can you scroll down or scroll up? Oh yeah, no,
It seems to be okay.
that
Let's try
the header.
on the Amazon.
Okay,
That might.
if
Is
you
that better?
yeah, allow me to share screen.
Okay.
As you can see here, this
Fine.
cover is intentionally controversial. The artist, I thought, did a very good job. She took the picture of Prabhupada in Tompkins Square Park, and I asked her to add several bad guys there. And so, right, you see they're holding masks, which means disguise. So, spiritual movements, right? What happens to them? And, you know, look on your, I was looking through the different videos on your channel, and you've interviewed some, let's say, devotees who have had a very unfortunate experience in what should have been a wonderful spiritual experience. And we all know that there's many, many devotees like this. We see on the Vedic Inquirer on Facebook, so many devotees who have had a horrific experience in the Gurukula. And not only the Gurukulis, but even back in the 70s, even when Prabhupada was with us, devotees were pushed out left and right for various reasons. And then particularly after Srila Prabhupada left, if the godbrothers didn't, let's say, kowtow to the new gurus, the zonal acharyas at that time, they were shown the door. And so there's been many, many thousands of disappointing experiences in what should have been a wonderful experience. So what happened? The question is, what happened? Why did it turn out to be such a fractured fairy tale, we might say? And my answer to that is we're in angst about this because we do not understand how the world works. And for that, of course, it's all explained in Srila Prabhupada's books. How is the world working? Well, let's go back 5,000 or 6,000 years. Bhumi Devi, she's going to complain to Lord Brahma. I can't stand it. Help! I can't. This demonic presence is overwhelming me. Do something. So we know the story. Brahma goes to the shore of the Milk Ocean, Svetadweep, and transmits a message to Lord Vishnu there, and the reply comes back, I'm coming personally to take care of this problem. And so this is the advent of Lord Krishna 5,000 years ago, just prior to the end of Dwapara Yuga. So what happened since then? These demons, although many of them, or most of them, were slaughtered, killed by Krishna and in the Battle of Kurukshetra, not all of them. Many remained, and since have reconstituted their numbers and have taken control of the earth, which we can understand simply by looking at the history of Western civilization, right? Conquest, war, slavery, exploitation, and so on. That's been the story of this planet practically especially the last 2,000 years that we know of. So what are the demons like? I mean, we understand this, right? Hiranyakashipu, he is the quintessential demon. And what does he want? He wants to own everything. He wants absolute control of everyone. He wanted to be God, right? So this tells us what the modern controllers are like. So in, was it Rajavidya? Srila Prabhupada, he wrote that this world is now controlled by Rakshasas. The Rakshasas, he said, are man-eaters who eat their own sons for the satisfaction of their senses. Now, great regimes have been created to smash so many people, but they do not realize that their senses will never be satisfied in this way. So when that happened, when that book came out, several devotees, they got together and they went to Srila Prabhupada and they asked him, wow, this was rather startling to them. The world is being controlled now by Rakshasas? Yes. Prabhupada answered yes. So they asked, well, who are they? You mean people like Rockefeller and Rothschild and those kind of people? Prabhupada said yes. Prabhupada explains that the world is currently managed by Rakshasas who, for the satisfaction of their senses, will eat their own sons. So the devotees were shocked by this because this may have been before the seventh canto came out. Rupanuga Prabhu tells the story that they went to Srila Prabhupada and they asked him, Prabhupada, what do we do? Prabhupada replied, preach to them. Of course. So, yeah, the world is controlled by Rakshasas, and they take every precaution to maintain that control. In fact, that was the working title for this book while I was writing it was Maintaining Control. I'll give you an example of how they maintain control. I was in Ukraine. I stayed in Ukraine for about 5 years preaching there, and with a group of devotees, we were starting a Vanashram project, a little village community. There was about 10 of us. And it was based on my other book, which I was just finishing at that time in 2008, Spiritual Economics from the Bhagavad Gita. And so every 6 months, I would have to leave Ukraine and go out of the country for visa issues. So I would go to Moldova. And at the south end of Moldova, there's a breakaway province called Transnistria. During the fall of the Soviet Union, this province, they decided that they wanted to stay aligned with Russia and not go with Moldova. Well, there happened to be a general there and a contingent of Soviet soldiers. And so there was a small war, and they won their right to be independent, free from Moldova. So the temple president in that area, he got to know that fellow. And when I would go visit, I got to know that man. Let's say I got to know the man who was the head of their intelligence services. And so he knows how the world works, right? He was trained by the KGB. So one day he asked me, well, explain to me, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're having a little project. We want to demonstrate the idea of how to live according to Bhagavad Gita, doing everything as an act of devotional service, and not having any money, any exchange, quid pro quo, anything like that, but a gift economy based on devotional service with God at the center. So he listened very intently. And then the first thing he said to me after I finished was, how are you going to protect yourself? Now, I thought that was a very curious question. I didn't quite understand. I asked him, what do you mean? He explained, the powers that be will not like what you're trying to do. The first thing they'll try to do is send somebody within your group to try to destroy you from within. If they are not successful at that, they will make all kind of bad propaganda about you in the local area to destroy you that way. And if they are not successful that way, they will come and destroy you physically. I was shocked. Of course, the first thing that came to mind was the Branch Davidians. Maybe you don't remember those, Narda. You were probably young.
Well,
Too
I
young
was
to
I was young, but I have read about them. So
yeah,
1993, Waco, Texas.
exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And for some reason or other, the United States government destroyed all those people. So, I'm thinking, well, what? There's not even 10 of us here, right? We're some kind of threat to the world. And he said, they won't even let you get a start, because if you do something that catches on, then they've got a fire that they've got to put out. So that's one lesson. So how do they control the world? They infiltrate everyone. Everyone. And I have a chapter about that in the book. The other thing was, as I traveled around Eastern Europe, Russia, practically everywhere I went, somehow or other, devotees came to confide in me that ISKCON, their local ISKCON chapter, was being infiltrated by the KGB, the CIA, this or that. The first devotee, I met one of the first devotees of Russia, Soviet times. He was in prison. And he explained that when he was in prison, he was told, for what it's worth, but he was told that the KGB had infiltrated our movement in New York, of all places, and all the way to the top, all the way to the GBC. There are many such instances that I was told like this. So what do? They infiltrate because they want to control from within. And it seems like that's what they're doing.
What encouraged you to write it? So,
Yeah.
based on your own experiences,
Yeah.
divine or
Okay.
demoniac, spiritual movements, and the enemies
So let me
within.
come back to that then. Back in the late 90s, there was a series of books that came out about the historical Jesus. Holy Blood, Holy Grail was one. Let's see, Bloodline of the Holy Grail by Lawrence Gardner. Anyway, a number of those books, the Da Vinci Code, fictional, but nonetheless about the same idea. So I'd read those books and it was intriguing, interesting. But there was one religious scholar, Robert Eisenman. He wrote a book called James, Brother of Jesus. Now, Eisenman, he was very significant, very key person in getting the Dead Sea Scrolls released to the public. Now, this history is extremely important. Many people may not know about it, but there was two groups of texts that were discovered in the late 40s, 47 and 49, I believe. The Nag Hammadi texts, which were found in a earthen jar buried in the desert in Egypt, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in the caves near Qumran, around the Dead Sea. So, although these were discovered in 1949, they were not made available to the public. They were kept in abeyance by a cabal of scholars at, I think it was the University of Jerusalem. But anyway, for 50 years. So Robert Eisenman, somehow or other, there's a lot of intrigue with that, but he was able to manage to get them released to the public. Now, so that's why there was a lot of a flurry of interest. What are the Dead Sea Scrolls? What do they say? Because these are texts from the first century Palestine, from Jesus and his people, directly from them without any interpretation. Of course, they had to be translated. So then, what was the contents actually? Eisenman came out with his books, and Eisenman gave a proper translation. So he was one of my source scholars that I use for the book. Another person, another scholar, Hans-Joachim Schoeps from Europe, he also made a proper interpretation, translation and interpretation of the scrolls. So what's Eisenman's translation? I'm reading his book, James, Brother of Jesus, and it explains the beliefs, the practices, the habits of those people. And as I'm reading this, I realize these people are Vaishnavas. And they were Vaishnavas like us. Right? They wore tilak. They worshipped a masculine and feminine deity. They revered the names of God, perhaps chanted. Their bathing and cleanliness habits were the same as ours. They would not eat food cooked by others, right? They would not even associate with non-devotees. They followed the four relative principles that we follow. And so if I were to ask, well, who are these people? If I just gave you these characteristics, you would say, well, those are Vaishnavas. Those are modern day Hare Krishnas. So when I was realizing that, I realized also that most scholars, unless they're familiar with Vaishnavism, they're not going to be able to see the parallel. But as a Vaishnava, of course, that's the first thing I did, the first thing I saw.
So tell us a bit about maybe some of the comparisons between that kind of first century Palestine and the information about the religion that was being practiced compared to Vaishnavism, and particularly the Vaishnavism that we try and practice today.
Well, as I mentioned, as far as from this material, it seemed that they were Vaishnavas like us. Now, this is not surprising because Srila Prabhupada mentioned that Vaishnavism, Krishna consciousness, was all over the planet at one time. Well, as it turned out, that the people of Palestine, they were of the opinion that their scriptures had been changed way, way back when, and that their kind and loving God was replaced by this monster Yahweh or Jehovah, who was thunders in a tent. He wants human sacrifices. He is vengeful. He had not the qualities of one would expect from God, but the qualities one would expect from the meanest sort of person. So the role of Jesus was to reestablish the principles of religion, to cross out those things that were false and to correct them. Now, Jesus, of course, was a prominent figure at that time because he was from the house of David, and the followers, not necessarily followers, because there was a huge number of them. It's not that Jesus and 12 disciples. There was such a huge number that the Roman army would have trouble with them all the time. And when they finally decided to destroy them, it took them 7 entire years. Hare Krishna. So they had an eschatological view of history that Jesus was going to be their leader in a battle against the forces of darkness. So James is a person who took up after Jesus was crucified. James became the leader of the what I call Jewish Vaishnavas. It's a term that I coined to describe them. And then later James was killed, and that begins the 7 Years' War of Rome to try to exterminate them. Now this is actually the point where I decided I have to write this book. I have to tell this story because I'm reading about the first century Jewish Vaishnavas, and I'm getting deja vu, right? This is the same thing that's happened to the Hare Krishna movement, because what happens then? You've got, after Jesus departs in 39 AD, this personality, Saul, who's the killer of the Jewish Vaishnavas, he purports to have a vision of the Christ, who is the risen Christ, and he begs to be allowed to become an acolyte among the followers of Jesus. Well, for many of them, that's too much because he had been killing them. So anyway, perhaps I figured it's better to have an enemy inside the camp rather than outside, so they allow him to come in. So Paul becomes the creator of Christianity. He also becomes the infiltrator of their group to what? Destroy it from within. Because what did they do? They took Jesus and his followers, they made a religion out of him, completely made up by not only Paul, who was a Roman, and other Romans who wrote the Bible. Well, what are you going to get from that? This is not revealed scripture, sorry to say, to all the Christians out there. It's not. It's written by Paul and the other Romans. So the parallels, they're just so strong. After reading this, I thought, okay, I have to write this book. So 2001 to 2003, I wrote the first part. The first part of the book is about the history of the Jewish Vaishnavas. When it came time to write part 2 about ISKCON, I realized that if I write this, I'm going to be shown the door, and I wasn't ready for that at that time, which is exactly what happened, of course. I wasn't ready for that, so I put the book on the shelf. And it wasn't until 2017 when, after traveling around and preaching within ISKCON for 10 years, basically, and I could see that this ISKCON is not the ISKCON we had when Srila Prabhupada was with us. Something is very different, something is wrong. And, okay, what is it? What happened? What's wrong? Well, I would see it. As I traveled around, I would see the problems, and mainly the problems were coming from above. And so I realized 2017, I was 69 years old, 68. I realized, okay, I'm out of time. I have to tell this story, regardless of the consequences, and we'll deal with that later. So I wrote the book. I wrote the second half, and then we got it published in 2019.
Wow. So there was like a 15-year gap between the first part and the second part.
Right.
That's quite amazing. I mean, I've written one book, and I knew that I had to kind of do it in one go over a 6 month period. Otherwise, I'd just forget. But the fact that it was on your mind for 15 years.
Well, not only on my mind, but approximately every 3 years, the super soul was like knocking on my
Mm,
door, like, gotta write this book. And I was going, we're not ready yet. It kept coming back every 3 years. And so maybe it was 2015, 16, like that. I realized, okay, finally I have to finish it.
mm.
So the second part, the Hare Krishna part, that wasn't difficult to do because, you know, all the devotees are exasperated, frustrated with the same things. It's not just me or not just you. I watched your story with interest, by the way, and I have a lot of compassion for what you did and respect for yourself for say staying loyal to Krishna consciousness and at the same time being able to reject what was not serving you.
Thank you. So, so I have to confess, I haven't read your book, but I've skimmed through it, and there's lots of really valuable information, and I can see that you've done a real thorough comparison of the kind of the first century Palestine, the religion of first century Palestine, that of Jesus or the Jewish Vaishnavas, with the 20th century movement of Srila Prabhupada, and comparisons between the two. In your book, you talk about how the demoniac control all the religions of the earth. You don't spare any. You say the demoniac control all the religions of the earth. Is that applied, or does that include ISKCON? And if so, how?
Well, Srila Prabhupada, he gave us, or he used frequently a phrase by which one can understand what's going on. He said, one cannot understand who is a devotee and who is a demon simply by looking at them, but rather one must judge by their results. So this judging by the results is a phrase, Sanskrit phrase, phalena prichyate, judge by the results. So we've got 50 years of results of ISKCON to go back and look at. And we've got hundreds and thousands of years of the Judeo-Christian religions. And what do we see? We don't see the leaders acting like spiritual people, right? What are they doing? They're using, let's say, they've created a hierarchical control in which the leaders command the subservience of thousands and millions of followers. Well, this is an arrangement by demons, right? You won't find institutions in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They don't exist. But the demons have created institutions for the purpose of allowing one person to control the actions and behaviors and beliefs of thousands and millions. So what do we see in the religions of the world? We see hierarchical control. Now, Srila Prabhupada did not set up ISKCON in that way. Okay, in the early days, the temple presidents were supposed to be autonomous. The GBC, Prabhupada created the GBC to do what? To do what he was doing. He needed assistants who were going to help him, right? To travel around, go to temples, enthuse the devotees, make sure everybody's chanting their rounds, going to the morning program, adjudicating any problems. But Prabhupada was not controlling anybody. Prabhupada was encouraging and supporting the temple presidents in what they were doing. And that's what he wanted the GBC to do. But the GBC, unfortunately, have created a hierarchical institution. That's not from Srila Prabhupada. And what does that do? In fact, that, what do they call it? A foundational document written by Ravindra Swarup, which is supposed to establish the position of Srila Prabhupada as the founder Acharya. Well, actually, if you read that document carefully, what you're going to find is the document equates the GBC with Srila Prabhupada. In other words, as being equal to Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, whatever the GBC says or mandates should be taken as coming from Srila Prabhupada himself. Srila Prabhupada never said that. In fact, not long after creating the GBC, they started to centralize things. And several times he chastised them severely for what they were doing. There's a famous letter to Karandar that everybody should read. Have you read that? Famous letter to Karandar in which Prabhupada is writing, the GBC, it's not the purpose of the GBC to control anything. He said, if you centralize things, you will ruin, it will spoil everything. Do not centralize. But that's what they've done. They've disobeyed that order of Srila Prabhupada. They've centralized the whole institution. And Srila Prabhupada said, if you create a bureaucracy, it will ruin everything. Well, what have they done? They've created a huge bureaucracy. Right? You've got the GBC, then you got the regional secretaries, and blah, 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 blah. I think there's something like 12 different layers of bureaucracy at the present time. So if devotees are not conversant with this early history of what Srila Prabhupada wanted, then they don't see a problem. Or let's put it another way. We read Srila Prabhupada's books and they're wonderful. We think, yes, this is the spiritual world. I found it. And we go to the temple and we expect it to be the manifestation of what we read in those books. Is it? Well, neophytes are unable to ascertain, to be able to understand what's right and what's wrong. So they come, everybody comes, and they, whoever the temple president, okay, he's the authority. They're senior devotees. I should listen to them for my own benefit. But we see that after some time, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it is, the rose-colored glasses come off, and the devotees will go, hey, wait a minute here, there's something wrong. Things are not adding up. It's like one anecdote from Bhaktivedanta Swami. He said he met some South India, some devotees, and they came to him and they asked him, well, we've been reading Srila Prabhupada's books for several years and started to chant, but we're a little confused. So please tell us, should we do what we read in the books or should we do what they tell us in the temple? Is that telling? Okay. So, yeah, at some stage, sooner or later, if we read the books, we'll be able to see that something's not right. And particularly if we read the foundational documents, right, the direction of management. You're familiar with that one, Narada?
I've heard of it, yeah. I've heard of it.
Oh, you haven't read it?
I haven't read it, no.
Okay.
I have a huge reading list, but I will read it.
That's a very important document to read. It's included in the book. The direction of management is where Srila Prabhupada established the GBC. And that was, I believe it was 1970 or early 70s.
Mm.
That document, nobody saw until, I think, the 90s. It was just, nobody knew about it. What Srila Prabhupada wrote there was that the GBCs should be elected every 3 years by a council of the temple presidents. That never happened.
Mm.
So,
I mean, I've raised that very issue so many times here in the UK. We should have elections rather than selections. We've got temple presidents in the UK that have been temple presidents for the best part of 20 years. Imagine, and I say to people, imagine if your local councillor or your local MP or your local senator or your local representative had been in post for 20 years. You get a bit bored and a bit stagnant. You think, we want change. And ISKCON has become this hierarchical institution where change just doesn't happen at all.
right. Even if there's something wrong, even if it needs to be changed. Or let's put it the other way, change happens where it shouldn't, right? And I've seen so many examples, again, because I've traveled around. Devotees come to me and they tell me how the GBC interferes with successful preaching. One example in Arizona, 2 young brahmacharis, very enthusiastic, they go out and they set up a temple. And they're having great success preaching at a local college. And the regional secretary finds out about it and comes to them and says, "What are you doing? You're not authorized. Shut this down." Well, wait a minute. We're having success here. Why don't you just authorize this? Oh, no, they don't do that. Another case is very practically identical to that in Uganda. One young law student, he gets Prabhupada's books, and on his own volition, he starts preaching and sharing that with everybody, just because he's inspired by what he's reading in Srila Prabhupada's books. And so then the regional secretary again comes and says, "Oh, you're not authorized. You can't do this." I'm like, what? Why not? Just authorize me then. Okay? So there's many examples where the GBC, they interfere with success, but they don't correct the problems.
There's a number of ongoing cases here in the UK where temple presidents have been investigated for different types of abuse, using members of the congregation, or have been investigated or are currently being investigated. And, the GBC and what's that organization? ISKCON Resolve, which doesn't resolve stuff. And it turns out that the temple president's also a member of ISKCON Resolve. And he's like, oh, he's got lots of hats and nothing's resolved, nothing's dealt with. And you have the same temple presidents in place. The congregation walks out, and it's this ongoing thing. I mean, I hear it on a regular basis because I speak out like you speak out. So people start to share with me their stories. And it happens everywhere. So there's been a lot of, we would probably both agree, there's been lots of deviations from the time of when Prabhupada was physically present. ISKCON has deviated so much. So I guess my question to you is ISKCON demoniac? What a question.
That's a pretty strong way to put it. Pretty straightforward. This begs the question, what is ISKCON? And this is a very important question. In fact, that's the title of a chapter in the book. Okay. The first thing, the chapter that precedes that is, I pose the question, okay, well, if ISKCON's been infiltrated, then who are they? Right? Who are these infiltrators? So I have a chapter, who is a devotee? And in that chapter, I give many examples because Bhagavatam is filled with, Bhagavatam and CC are filled with examples of people who have the form but do not have the substance. And conversely, people who have, or let's say devotees who have the substance, but not the form. Okay, let's take some examples of the latter. Who has the substance, but not the form? All of Lord Chaitanya's associates, particularly Haridas Thakur, right? From a Muslim family. He's perhaps one of the least likely persons who should be given the position of Namacharya. But why does Lord Chaitanya do that? To show that the form is insignificant, inconsequential. It's the substance of the person that's important. Where's another example like that? How about the gopis themselves, right? Simple village girls. They don't have any position. They don't have any title. They don't wear special clothes, but they love Krishna. And that's their qualification. They have the substance, not the form. Many, many examples like that. And then there's examples of those who have the form, but not the substance. So what do we have in our society? We have, who has the substance and who has the form? Well, any devotee can have the substance, can be the pot washer who has the substance, right? Does form actually mean anything? Unfortunately, for neophyte devotees, it does, because they have no other criteria by which to judge who's an advanced devotee. So they see somebody with a title, somebody with position, authority, a certain dress, somebody especially with the moniker spiritual master. Oh, well, then there's somebody, right? But it only later, after the devotee matures in their devotional service and is purified, goes through some anartha nivritti, that they're able to distinguish between the form and substance. So then comes the question, what is ISKCON? Form or substance? What's the difference? The substance is Srila Prabhupada and his instructions. He created ISKCON. He defined what it is, and he is the personification of ISKCON. And that will never change. That will never change. What's the form? The temples, the management structure, GBC. GBC are part of the form, not the substance, right? They have a position, a title, okay. And what? Prabhupada picked his leading men at the time who were at most 5 years with him, but that's all he had. So he asked them to help him. He said, you just repeat what I've told you, everything will be okay. But they went beyond they went beyond that. So we have the form and we have the substance. And we have to be able to distinguish between the two of them in order to understand what's what. So Prabhupada is the substance, and Prabhupada's instructions are the substance. Everything else is form. And we can always stay in ISKCON by simply following Srila Prabhupada. Very simple. To give you a simple example of that, Yamuna Devi, our revered God sister, everybody knows her. Wonderful singing is the song that we hear every morning, greeting the deities. So she became a little independent of the GBC in 76 or 77, and she was told that if you don't follow the GBC, you're not in ISKCON. So she went to Prabhupada and she asked him. And Prabhupada replied, anyone who is chanting Hare Krishna is in ISKCON. That's his definition. And it applies to everybody. So that's the mission. That's the substance. Okay, the form is inconsequential. Means nothing. Unfortunately, they're trying to make the form everything. But it's not. So we have to understand very carefully what's what and be able to discriminate. Right? Again, Palena Parichite. We judge by the result. We see what's going on. We can understand who is divine, who is demoniac, simply by observing their activities and the results of their actions. And from that, we can understand, and then we should use our intelligence to act correspondingly. The challenge here is our heart. It's natural. We come to Krishna consciousness, we love Krishna consciousness, we love ISKCON. I've given my whole life to ISKCON, right? And that's why it was so hard for me I put this book off for years and years, because I knew I'd be shown the door. What am I going to do then? And to be frank, it hasn't been easy since then. Like many devotees who are rejected, kicked out for one reason or another. In Florida, where I spent a lot of time, in Alachua, the big community in the United States, temple president there likes to ban people. Right? So without even discussing my book, without even asking a question about it, I get a letter from the entire Alachua board saying, I'm banned from going to the temple. Well, can we have a trial? Can we have a discussion? No. Then I'm not the only one. Svalamukhi, another one, right? So it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because we want the association. Where do we go for association? Prabhupada created the temples to give us a place to associate and come together to chant and hear about Krishna. So when we're bereft of that, what do? So that leads to the conclusion of the book, part 3, which is very simple. Start the Hare Krishna movement again. Which means what? Simply do what Srila Prabhupada asked us to do. Let's all of us who have been rejected, ejected, banned, come together, right? And follow Prabhupada.
I've certainly noticed over the last maybe 2 years, since I stopped serving in ISKCON, or since I was removed from my own services, also for writing a book, is that I've discovered there's a whole community, with a small c, there's a whole community of devotees outside of the institution of ISKCON or the GBC ISKCON that still take shelter of Prabhupada. And there's a lot of them, a lot of us. My book was on the Hare Krishna movement in Britain and the diversity of it, and going back actually to the 30s. But I put together a chart of all the different mats in the UK. Some of them were offshoots of ISKCON, some were Narayan Maharaj, Sridhar Maharaj. And there was a big clump of offshoots that were kind of from ISKCON. And what they all had in common was that they still followed Prabhupada as if they were within the institution of ISKCON, but just weren't anymore. And at the moment in the UK alone, there's at least 5 different it's a relative number, 5 big-ish groups now that are following Prabhupada, but not under the institution of the GBC, and it's great. And they're all having a lot of success. They're growing, and some of them will have different views on small issues, but for me, that's not very important. And they're growing. And I would say, in a relative sense, they're having more success than the GBC run ISKCON, because the GBC run ISKCON is quite stagnant. The number of Western people, so people that look like me, joining, converting, is, you can count on one hand. And certainly in the UK, the ISKCON temples are focused on the Indian diaspora. Absolutely nothing wrong with Indians at all. I'm not saying that, but on the Indian diaspora, the priority is, ensuring that they have a Hindu temple to attend once a week, and they can provide wedding facilities and wedding services, and satsang, not a word we use in ISKCON, but whatever that is. And there seems to have been a movement away from, we're not worried about the Westerners anymore. And actually, you've got some temples or centers in the UK that are struggling to pay the bills, put the lights on, pay the electricity costs, and all the money goes on, certain big temples. And also I've discovered there's a whole network of devotees now outside of this GBC run ISKCON that are looking for association, they're looking for friendship, they're looking for guidance. I mean, I haven't seen it, but I've been told there's a Facebook group called Band Together, and there's like 1,000 members, and that's great.
It's with Jwalamukhi and her group.
Yeah. And in the USA, you've got Purely Prabhupada, who, from what I can tell, they're just following Prabhupada. And
that's the Band Together group.
It's fine. It's great. So pressing reset. So you're suggesting in your book that we can just restart the Hare Krishna movement all over again.
Yeah, while you were speaking, I'm reminded of the fact that when Prabhupada was with us, we were an extremely revolutionary society. In America, like the Vietnam War was going on, the blacks and the whites, all that struggle was going on. And here comes Prabhupada in the middle of all this social turmoil, and stays with us. And, the devotees, they go out and they chant, and we were convinced at that time, we're in a war with Maya, and we're going to win. No question in our minds. And so we did Harinam. With that in mind, we're going to, purify the atmosphere, and the whole world's going to become Krishna conscious, and we're all going to live happily ever after. It will happen, but it's going to, we're just separated by time, as we say.
Yeah, separated by time. I like that kind of approach.
Yeah. So, we were revolutionary, but what's happened in the interim is that ISKCON has gone mainstream, right? When I joined, to be a devotee rather than a fringy, you had to give up your material life entirely, leave it behind, give up everything you had, and move in the temple and live in the temple. Otherwise, you're not really considered a serious devotee. So it was a revolution, but there is no longer any revolutionary fervor in the society, right? And what we capitulate and surrender to the demonic world government, or the demonic national government, whatever the government is, right? The present society, we must understand this world is still controlled by demons. It's arranged by them for their purposes. And what are they doing? Very subtly exploiting everybody on this planet with the means of money and making everybody, slaves, basically. They're doing the same thing that Kamsa was doing, right? Stop the sacrifice. Well, if you go to Mangal Arti, like in Alachua, 1,500 devotees in that community. Mangal Arti, there's 30, maybe. Where's everybody else? They're living in the other culture, right? the dominant culture, the dominant materialistic, atheistic culture. Because why? Because we need to get money. And where do you get money? From somebody else who has money. And where do they get money? They create it out of thin air. And this way they're controlling and manipulating everyone. And we've surrendered to that. Rather than creating an alternative. My conviction was Prabhupada wanted to create an alternative way of living in this world. He was so strongly criticized on our society. Why are you working? Fool. They're giving you paper. So, yeah, ISKCON surrendered. You know, what are they instructed now? Get a job. In some temples, you can't get initiated unless you've got a university degree.
That's bizarre. Is that in the USA or elsewhere?
India.
Wow.
Maybe that's just one guru, his policy.
So my next question, well, kind of one of my final questions, you've kind of already answered, but in terms of your talking about the community that you live in now, the area you live in now, but in terms of how has your book been received within ISKCON?
Within ISKCON, it hasn't been received.
It's probably one of the most controversial books within the Hare Krishna movement. I mean, is that too much to say?
Probably because I point the finger at the leaders, right? I mean, if something is going wrong, the blame goes to the top. If something is going right, the credit goes to the top. So how do we judge? Phalena Parichite. What's the result? How are things going? Terribly. The books are being changed, right? That's a big one. Of course, we know that same history with Christianity, you know, whatever. That's why I say Jesus, his job was to correct the things that were wrong in their scripture. So that's the same MO. The demons are using the same MO, right? You take out the leader, you change the books, you destroy the followers, which is during the 7 Years' War, what the Romans were doing, destroying the followers. And I give many examples of how the women, the second generation, and all the Prabhus were driven out of the society. So the same MO, because why? Because it works. And what do you get? You get the form, but not the substance, which is their goal. Their goal is to, and it's the same with every religion, right? They want to make a religion subservient to the state. This is what the Romans had a problem with the Jewish Vaishnavas, because the same reason Hiranyakashipu had a problem with his son. You're not subservient to me, right? Everywhere else in the Roman Empire, the conquered people, they were subservient. And the Romans, you know, if people paid their taxes, they were all, you know, they would all get along. But the Jewish Vaishnavas, they weren't having it. So,
have you received any praise?
Oh yeah. Well, look on my website. Go on divinerdomoniac.com. Look on the website. There's tons of praise. Devotees from all over have sent appreciation. Probably I'm
going to just go to your website now if I can.
Okay. One of the most gratifying things that I had heard is that a second generation devotee who had left Krishna consciousness altogether, scroll down, left Krishna consciousness altogether. So this first, yeah. So these are some. The Robert Eisenman, he wrote a very wonderful testimonial, which is above these. But back to that.
Mm. I mean, I know Nami Maharaj. I know I've met him a few times. He's here in the UK. I think that's the same Nami Maharaj.
Oh yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
He's been a guest on this podcast many years ago.
This one young devotee who had left it, Krishna consciousness altogether. Her father gave her my book. After reading it, she had begun chanting her japa again and come back to practicing Krishna consciousness.
And if any, Mukunda Swami.
This is not the Mukunda Swami ACBSP.
Okay.
This Mukunda Swami was given sannyas, I believe, by Kirtanananda. He had a center in Pittsburgh.
Mm.
But, anyway, he read it, gave his appreciation.
And have any of the kind of leaders of ISKCON secretly endorsed you or secretly given you praise for this book?
Not that I've heard. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good communicator. I write books instead of talk to people. None of them have reached out to me, other than, of course, I'm assuming that none of them have read it. Or let's put it this way: one sannyasi, one ISKCON guru, was deputied to read the book, Bir Krishna Swami, and give his opinion about what what the other leaders should make of it. Well, if you know Bir Krishna Swami, you can judge what kind of result you would get. Let's just say he's a company man, and the verdict came accordingly. I tried to communicate with him, and my emails were rejected. And then based on his assessment, the North American GBC and I think the UK Council, they all decided that I should not be able to give classes in ISKCON temples or spend nights in ISKCON temples.
Yeah, so I think I told you this offline a week ago, that I was sitting in at that National Council meeting in the UK in 2019. So I was subbing for someone else. I was kind of a permanent substitute for someone who couldn't bother to go to the meetings for about 4 years. But it was great for me. I got to sit in and listen and hear lots of stuff, and heard about the politics of ISKCON and how it worked. And I remember the meeting. I was there when your book came up for discussion. And I thought I told you this, but maybe I didn't. But so you see, there was never really an agenda for the meeting. If there was an agenda, it was very brief, very minimalistic, and really you didn't really understand or know what you were going to talk about. So all of a sudden, the GBC for the UK at the time, he's not currently the GBC anymore, but he's still very much behind the scenes pushing things around, because the UK doesn't have a GBC and hasn't had for a year, but it still manages to survive. I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, so he just said, hey, there's this book. Dennis Prabhu has written this book, and it's really controversial, and it's terrible, and he's banned from all the ISKCON temples in the UK. Okay, next. And I'm like, oh, it's like nobody even has a chance to breathe or respond. And that's how my experience of National Council meetings in the UK, and I mentioned this when I was interviewed in episode 100, is that it's very much an older gentleman's club where people just
they call it the old boys club.
Old boys club. And they just agree with the top guy because they just want some prasadam and want to get home, And so that's when I first heard about your very controversial book about what years? So 4.5 years ago.
Yeah. I write books. I don't do much to promote them. I should have been on your show whenever you first started, but
Don't worry.
Anyway, when I learned about your Hare Krishna project, I was very enthusiastic, very happy to hear. Oh, there's somebody who's doing this independently of ISKCON. That's great. So yeah, and many devotees are, elsewhere. So I just encourage everyone. As soon as the rose-colored glasses come off, don't feel like you're the only person that's happened to. There's thousands. There's probably more devotees outside of ISKCON now than there are in ISKCON.
Probably true. I shouldn't laugh, but it's so true.
Yeah, yeah. So all we need to do is, we need to find each other and, establish some camaraderie. That happens. It's a personal world. So, let's get together and chant Hare Krishna and be happy.
Well, before we finish, I will reveal that I don't think I've told you this yet, but there are some conversations going on behind the scenes amongst some of the European temples that are independent from ISKCON. So when I say independent, I mean those that take shelter of Prabhupada, but are not Narayan Maharaj or Sridhar Maharaj. There's at least 5 projects or temples that are starting to have conversations about forming some kind of cooperation agreement. It sounds a bit political, doesn't it? But some kind of very loose alliance of temples.
Good. Yeah, that's what I call it Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON as opposed to the GBC's ISKCON.
Yeah.
The real question, the real challenge here is Guru. Who will initiate? Because naturally, you read Prabhupada's books and we're all encouraged to take initiation. So who's going to do that? So you've got Narayan Maharaj, you've got Gaudiya Math, you've got the Ritviks. That's where you go. Unless, there are some God brothers, besides myself, who are talking about accepting disciples with the careful distinction between the Acharya and the regular Guru, which I don't think I've never heard that discussed like that. But that's my position. I'd say, reluctant to go forward in that simply because of all the controversy about it. But I think it's something that's necessary. I've written a book, right? I'm expected to take the lead in the solution. So I believe I've got to start making some videos and speaking about that, because without solving the Guru question, it's almost impossible to go forward.
Yeah, I agree. And just to say on the whole Ritvik thing, that here in the UK we have at least 4 Ritvik groups, and they generally disagree with each other on different issues. So there's different levels of Ritvikism. And I would say there's one group that's particularly hard Ritvik, kind of Puritan Ritvik, and they're so Puritan they won't even talk to me. I've invited them to be on the podcast and they've refused to talk to anyone who doesn't follow. It's like the Amish or something. And then you've got real soft Ritvik, like they know I'm not a Ritvik, but I'm still allowed to go to their temple, chant Hare Krishna with them, follow Prabhupada with them, and we're really good friends. So there's different levels of Ritvikism,
Yeah, there's over here maybe over there also what are called the Prabhupada-nugas.
Yeah, I've heard that term.
So, that's a umbrella term for those who remain loyal to Prabhupada outside of ISKCON.
Yeah. Great. Okay. I'm just going to give another plug for your book, because I want people to buy your book and visit your website. So what I'll do.
Let me just mention the ebook, because it costs nothing to print, is still damn cheap, Bubba. It's only $5. So anybody can get that. If you want paper, then paper costs money to print, so it costs some money. But either way, it's it's the same book.
Great, excellent. And I will make sure that the links to your website and maybe the Amazon, people can buy the book. I'll put that with the podcast so if you're listening to this now, if you look down at the caption, you'll see links to Daneswara Prabhu's book, which I have to confess I haven't read yet, but I'm recommending it to myself to read as well.
Put it on the top of your reading list.
Yes, if it's the most controversial book in ISKCON, we should all be reading it. I think one of the things that the Christians are good at is knowing what their critics are saying about them, which is I often praise the Christians on here actually because they're much better at just dealing with issues, I think. But so please do buy a copy of Dineshwar Prabhu's book, and you can also contact him through his website. I will put a link to his website.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The one website I would really want everybody to look at, my initiative is the Spiritual Revolution. The website is spiritualrevolution.global.
Okay.
And the effort there is simply to pass out unlimited mantra cards and ask people to do what Lord Chaitanya asked us to do. Everybody you meet, ask them to chant the Maha Mantra. The website I give, the Spiritual Revolution it's a play on words. There's spiritual revolution and spiritual evolution. It's time to evolve spiritually. Prabhupada's given the world this spiritual knowledge, which has been absent for thousands of years. And the revolution is that by chanting the holy name, it can change the world. Prabhupada said, if only 1 or 2% of the people will chant the Maha Mantra, that's enough to make this world a different place. So that's the initiative. Wherever you're at, make it your goal in your city to you get 1% of the people to chant the Maha Mantra daily. And I tell people, I pass out the mantra card. I say, it's looking pretty sketchy these days, right? I mean, there's talking about war. They're, rattling the sabers. We need the help of God. And here's a very nice prayer. This is called the Maha Mantra, the great mantra for deliverance. And I asked them to repeat it after me, so they at least chant it once. And then I asked them, please recite this beautiful prayer every day, asking God for his mercy and help on this crazy world. So I'd like to see that take off, really get a lot of help with that. Print the cards yourself. You can make up your own card, whatever. But the whole idea is to get people to understand that it's time to grow individually, spiritually, and it's time to change this world to usher in the golden age of Lord Chaitanya.
Sounds wonderful, and I feel really pleased to be a part of it. Actually, you put it so nicely at the end there, and absolutely. So, Dennis,
and it's a non-sectarian effort. There's nothing about any guru, any group there. It's just the Maha Mantra. That's all. Maha Mantra. Anybody can use it. Anybody can use that website. Just, print a card, put the reference there. And, there's some explanation of the Maha Mantra, the glories of the Maha Mantra. And an invitation to grow spiritually by reading Bhagavad Gita. As it is.
Absolutely, which is here.
That one.
Yes. Yes. So I'm going to say goodbye, I think, to the viewers at home, but it's been a delight to have Daneswara Prabhu as our 105th guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. I can't believe it's taken 105 episodes to get to him. to finally get around to discussing the most controversial book in the Hare Krishna movement. So I will make sure that there are links to Daneswara Prabhu's books and websites with this podcast. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, to hit that all-important subscribe button so you kept updated about future podcasts from the Hare Krishna Project. And if you're watching this on Facebook, to like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. And of course, on both, you can put a comment or hopefully some constructive feedback. I do love to hear feedback from our viewers, and I always receive feedback after every podcast, actually. So
I suppose I should look there too.
Yes, see what they're saying about you. I'm saying about me as well sometimes. Dennis Farper, we can have a very brief debrief after, but I'll say goodbye to the viewers at home. So until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Narada.